All right, and we're back. So full disclosure, this is a re-recording of the second half of the first podcast because we had some technical difficulties and I'm a little anal. Although I did recover the audio and the video, it wasn't exactly how I wanted it for editing purposes. So we're going to kind of try to recapture this. Hopefully we don't go too far back into what we talked about. It's been about a week. So um, you know, we both have busy lives and my memory is not the greatest at times. So we will go from there. So where we kind of left off is we were talking about color genetics. I had asked you at that time, had you ever made the decision to pick a pup based on similar markings or similar colors? And you said you had never taken that into account before, but you have noticed that some of the dogs that had similar markings to some of your foundation dogs or dogs in the past in the pedigree, definitely took after those animals, with regards to phenotype and even more with temperament. Um, so moving forward off that, I think we covered it pretty well. Um, it- let's talk about puppy evaluations. So when you have a litter,
Yeah.
let's talk about let's just start. What's your method of kind of evaluating the litter from, let's say, whelp to 8 weeks? Where do you find the sweet spot is for different criteria that you're looking for, and what do you do in that kind of time period?
Well, I mean, right off the hop, you're generally able to see different tendencies of size. You definitely see head size, and there's always a couple that pop out. Now, this is a breed that heads are important, and I'm a standard breeder, but I still like a big, blocky, wide muzzle. So I'm watching for that, and I'm watching for that for pigment early on. At about 3 weeks, 3, 5, and 7 weeks, I evaluate structure fairly heavily. And I start taking videos where I don't try stacking them because I find you can force a puppy into a stack and you don't get what you want. I'll do a video and I'll drop them and I'll spin them around and look at all angles and I'll go back and watch that video. So 3, 5, and 7. My structure evaluations are generally done by 7 weeks.
Okay.
Temperament's a different thing though. That's a consistency
Well,
thing.
let me go back for a second. You touched on size. Have you ever found that, let's say you have a litter of 7 to 8, your standard litter. Have you ever found that some that were big early on had over time in the 8 weeks had kind of maybe, I'm not gonna say get smaller, but the other pups that maybe were smaller had caught up and maybe changed your mind later? Had you had disparity within size in the litter from where you started to where you finished up?
Not really. I mean, generally speaking, they generally say consistent. There's a little bit of flip flopping. I get the odd small surprise. But when it comes to size, that don't necessarily mean the biggest. But I look at some people look at the biggest and the heaviest. That's not necessarily the biggest. I'm looking at the width. I'm looking at the bone on the front legs, the back legs, and just I don't want to look at how big their foot is necessarily because that's not important, but I'm just looking at overall size as opposed to weight. And head type in thickness of muzzle and in broadness of forehead, I see be consistent generally as they get older. On a standard litter size, you're right. I had a litter of 14 once and I had a sneaker that snuck up on me in size, but he still wasn't the biggest in the litter.
Yeah, I always think it's funny when people, I think the average pet person will see a dog, a puppy, and they'll be like, "Oh, look at the size of his paws. He's gonna be huge." And I can tell you straight up that
Big feet.
Jamaica had big feet, and her son has big feet, and it has no correlation to do with size. Even after he's fully grown, he still has big feet for his size, which is strange. They just have
Yeah,
big feet. It has nothing to do with the actual size of the animal. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then so as far as okay, for the structure, you've got a little method. You're taking video, you're watching them kind of move naturally. Um, And how do you go about evaluating temperament? Where's your sweet spot with the temperaments?
Usually my spot with temperament is that I really start watching them when they start to get weaned. Because what you see at 3 to 4 weeks is how much milk they got and who pushed the other one off. You start to see squabbling amongst them at 5 and who's kind of bossy, and you kind of start watching things. But what you do see at 5 weeks is those ones that sit back and patiently just kind of sit back. And generally those ones that are sitting back at 5 weeks are my more laid back pups that are maybe more suitable for a pet home. Um, the temperament to me really stands out between 5 and 7 on which ones I'm going to choose. And usually by 6.5 to 7 weeks, I know which ones are for me, for my program. And when I talk temperament, I don't want the asshole. I don't want the one scruffy all the time. Don't want necessarily the one that's wandering off and is independent. I want the one looking at me, paying attention to me, because those are the trainable ones when you're trying to do obedience and you're trying to keep a dog from looking the other direction and starting shit somewhere else. I want them looking at me. So, in addition to looking for a fearless dog with good, strong nerve and recovery, I'm also wanting something that's fairly biddable because when they've got the level of drive that I'm producing, I want them listening to me.
Do you find there's any correlation between what we'll call the independent puppy, the one that doesn't necessarily need to be with the pack? Maybe you set the dogs outside and it wanders off right away from the group. Do you find any correlation between that independence with confidence? Do you find that those dogs tend to be more confident by that metric, or do you find that it really doesn't play into anything?
They generally are confident, but where I run into issues and I've seen it over a few generations is the dog that's wandering off is the dog that's really hard to compete with in obedience later. And I saw it with my dog Scully. He was an independent thinker. I wouldn't have said from the beginning, like, yeah, he followed me around, but he was the dog later that he's so hard to rein in obedience. His daughter, Katie, she's in a great home, in a Shih Tzu home. She's not the greatest obedience, and that's where you need that for some higher level competition. So if I've got people looking for sport dogs or even just on an everyday basis, I want them more paying attention to me. And sometimes those independent ones are maybe better for somebody that isn't looking for a sport type dog for obedience. Maybe for a working dog, but not necessarily for
Okay.
sport. Still good for working, but not necessarily for
Yeah, that's
sport.
that's that's interesting. So when let's say we're at 8 weeks, you've now made your selection. What's your typical for for what you plan to do with your dogs? What is your typical methodology for raising that pup in the environment that you have?
In my environment, anything that stays with me, I have a pack, so to speak, but my pack doesn't get all turned out together. The pup gets introduced to all of my dogs, but it's raised in my house in a crate. I do not trust to throw puppies into kennels because I'm afraid of dogs being stolen. As little puppies, they're defenseless. I want them with me. They're doing stuff with, I have a home office. They're doing stuff with me in the morning. Then they go into a crate. They get exposed to a crate fairly early and more consistent time right off the hop. And I try to integrate them into it in a daily life. I don't take them a lot of places off the hop because there's been a lot of disease kicking around, especially since COVID. I uh, I've seen too many things go wrong and dogs get sick, and puppies, get very sick and die. So I don't necessarily take them out to a lot of places, but I just kind of integrate them into, and I just start into the obedience training and I let them be a puppy though. Like I think you can do too much with a puppy and try too hard, too young, and then either burn out the puppy or burn out yourself. So
Ye
it depends on what my goal is with that puppy too.
So, and this is something I try to push on to my owners. How much time would you say that your, let's say, 8 to 16-week-old pup, how much time would you say they're in a crate versus, uh, being out supervised?
A lot more time in a
Mhm.
crate than
Yeah.
unsupervised. They don't I have little kids and there's little socks kicking around this house. I do keep one of those pens, you know, like those, like, pen setups, like, they're black metal and they've got little pins in the
Yeah,
corner,
yeah.
like people
Yeah,
use them
puppy
as play
pen, yeah.
pens. They don't last in those things very long.
Yeah,
As soon as they can figure it out, they're knocking it over, coming out. It's there even right now. Last night, a 14-week-old puppy, I'm watching TV. I threw him in the pen just because he was being annoying. Um, but I don't leave them unattended loose in my house ever.
yeah,
Never. I don't even do that with my adult dogs half the time. I don't
yeah.
trust them.
So that was my point is I always try to push onto these puppy owners that the crate should be home base. The crate should be where this dog
Yep,
lives until you can stop doing whatever your day has going on, you can stop and totally pay attention to the pup. You know, I usually tell them,
yep,
put the dog in the crate, you always treat it into the crate, take the dog out of the crate, it goes outside immediately. Once it potties, it can come back in. You can stop, do whatever you're going to do, but only pay attention to the puppy. That way you can see if it has to go to the bathroom again. Um, you know, whatever your routine is with that dog. And then when you have to get up and go do something else, it's time to do homework with the kids or cook dinner or clean something or you got a project you got to work on, puppy goes back in the crate 100%. So he's just so used to being in the crate all the time that I think it just builds a better structure with the animal. I think a lot of pet people struggle with that. They feel like, oh, it's a new pet. It should have freedom to the house, which I think is a big issue in a working breed when you allow these dogs, puppies, dogs in general to uh, to get too much freedom and share space. It was ironically, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but ironically, I just had this conversation with someone else about uh, my kennel dogs versus my house dogs and the relationship that I have with those animals. My kennel dogs, it's more of a it's more of a handler dog kind of relationship first and foremost all the time. So just like right now, I've got a dog that's got a gimp leg. He's been going to the office with me. He's been primarily raised in a kennel, comes out, he gets his free time, he gets his time, but he's had now to travel with me daily, go into my office, sit in a crate all day. And we just have a relationship that is a working dog to a handler more than if I tried to do that with a dog that is on crate and rotate in my house. I feel like the boundaries are a lot more blurry because that dog is on the couch with me regularly and they seem to be more needy. They don't always listen as well because they're just so used to being around you regularly. I think I don't know exactly how to articulate it so well, but I feel like the lines are a lot more blurry, and I feel like every dog that I have done my typical raising program, um, in the kennel, I bring out typically they're getting some, like, real one-on-one time, or they're getting worked, or they're getting trained, or they're going off property, and they just like, "Okay, it's job time, like, this is my time to do my job." And, I think it just works out better, but I feel like when people give these working breeds too much space as puppies, especially in that first year, it really kind of sets you backwards almost, in my opinion, with kind of the handler relationship, kind of the pack mentality, if you will, who's in charge. Um, so you're using the crate, and then at what age do you kinda start introducing obedience? How long, are you working that pup, and what are you trying to get in, let's say, the first 6 months? Is there anything you're trying to establish in the first 6 months, or you're not doing anything besides just kind of day-to-day life stuff?
I've done both ways, and part of my differences in the dogs that I have now has been coincidental, what other things I've got going on and what's my goal with that dog, so to speak. So currently I have a 14-week-old puppy here. When it came home, I started with obedience right off the hop. But my version of obedience is more of a focus and trying to get them into positions and get them to understand where I'm going to take them. Um, you also have to know that when you're doing any type of sport that you need to have cues that are just in the house. Your plats and your down are 2 different things. Down and relax, stay, place, all these things. You really need to separate what you're doing on the field and what you're doing in the home environment. So they know when you go to the field, like, they have a different level of intensity.
Mhm.
So it becomes a little tricky when you're especially when I've got kids in the home that are doing stuff with them. But I start right from the beginning, just building focus. And you wanna know what? My puppy now still goes around the house with a 15-foot long line on it. Um, I put that long line on it because I don't wanna repeat its name and get it teach it that, "Hey, you don't have to come when I call you." So I tell a lot of my owners to do the same thing, put a 6-foot leash, or I just go to the dollar store and get a 15-foot nylon leash and I put it on it. And I know that I can control it and it can't go to all other levels of the house without me. Um, so I want it underneath me, I want it with me, and I want its whole world to revolve around me. Because when I wanna go do some more sport work, I want that focus. Now, I have had dogs that I don't do as much with, or I've had some overlap in puppies I've held on to longer, and that's the biggest pain in the butt. When you're trying to focus on your own puppy and you've got extra puppies kicking around, um, sometimes those puppies don't get the same focus.
I totally agree with you there. Anytime I've had stragglers, the only pup that really sacrifices is the one that I keep, just because, I mean, you're still stuck in that day in, day out grind of having puppies, and, the older they get, the more mess they make, the more time you gotta get them out, and they've got when if you got 2 or 3, left over, you keeping 1, got 2 that you still got for sale, even if you're into that 9-10 week corridor, um, there's a lot that goes into just making sure they're getting their daily needs met, and, we have to bring them in the house. We're trying to, get them set up for some level of success. I can't do everything for the new owner, and I'm not gonna train their dog for them, up front, but in the same respect, all the training that I would normally take on right off the rip, if all the pups left except for the ones we kept, typically that next night it's in the living room 5-10 minutes working on some focus stuff, and trying to work towards a goal, whatever that may be at the time. But and every dog, like you said, I mean, it's the unfortunate truth as a breeder. um, you get a lot of prospects, you keep dogs, and it depends on where you're at with your life, what's going on. There's a whole plethora of other variables that go into it. And I applaud anybody that can really put the effort into every single dog at the same level, because I know for me, it's just dependent on the time of year, my workload, other projects that I have going on, what I can actually get accomplished with any said puppy. Um, I think we touched on it initially, but I'm gonna ask anyways. When you do your puppy evaluations and you said you kinda have got your, um, mind made up at 7 weeks. Have you ever found that there would maybe be value in keeping 2 to 3 pups back for a longer evaluation? Or is your mindset that your decision's made at 7 weeks, this is my best point of reference, and I'm gonna run with it?
I find when you get beyond 8 weeks, you just start second guessing yourself and bouncing back and forth. And make matters worse, you had puppy uglies and they start to grow at different stages. And it just doesn't work for me. I've seen other breeders do it, and I really see them. The longer they hold on to them, the longer they delay their decision. I don't think there's any merit in it myself. I'm sorry for the puppy
Um,
in the background making noise. So I don't see any merit with it. Plus, sometimes the puppies that I'm holding back are going to co-own homes. So I want to make that decision, get them into their home and move forward. Um, I did have one that I changed my mind on. Um,
it
I had two. I had a straggler, and I didn't keep the one I was originally thinking about keeping.
Really?
I but interestingly enough, I always liked that one in the beginning, but I just thought she was too chill and too laid back. Interestingly enough, she's probably my easiest dog I've ever had
Mm.
because of that. And I thought you spend so much time looking for drive and whatnot. What I realize is she's got all the drive in the world. She just has that fantastic off switch. Um, and let me tell you, she works. But I was just in a position at that time that I couldn't take on any more sport dogs anyways, and I thought, "Why do I need another, like, go, 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 go puppy?" And there was just something about this puppy, and I kept her. Um, and she's produced my last 2 litters. Outstanding working litters, outstanding structure. Um, but I literally just went, "Why am I trying to keep a working puppy if I can't work another dog?" I'm at my capacity of what I'm able to work right now because I had 2 working males at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought about it that way. I'm not a working guy, and I've said that before. I just don't have enough time in the day to do anything more than I do already. Um, but it's interesting that you would say that, at the time you're like, I don't need another working dog, so I'm gonna let maybe not look for that true working prospect this time, and know that it's there genetically, but maybe this dog isn't so pronounced in those traits. But that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a different perspective for me to take on. um just out of curiosity, have you ever had any like quirky, how do I phrase this, like quirky things that you've seen over the years in your whelps? Like, for me, it seems like the first puppy's always the biggest that comes out. Have you seen maybe that, the smallest pup has a certain type of temperament versus the rest of the litter? Anything like that? Any quirky noticings that you've had in over the years?
In the beginning, I was noticing, and I didn't clue in because I record the order that they're
Mhm.
born. I realized that some of the dogs I was keeping were actually the firstborn, and I didn't even realize it until after. Um, I had a weird thing happen in a whelp once. It's the only time I've never given a dog an oxytocin shot. And usually I just do it for a clean out if necessary. I had a puppy born 22 days later after whelping,
Yeah, you know what? I remember that. I
and
remember seeing.
it had been
Yeah,
alive.
it what? It was a
It
Oh, it
had been
had been.
alive until right until she had it. It had been alive because it wasn't necrotic, and during her having I couldn't understand what she was doing. And the puppies were literally 20, 21, or 22 days old, and it came out kind of flattened, but it had been recently alive. It wasn't stiff when it
That
came
is the
out.
most bizarre thing. Now, I've had some puppies show up, like, 12 hours later. 22 days is a little different.
One it was either 20 I think it was 22 days because I was like, "What in the frick?" All I could think was, "Well, if that's in there, what else is in there?" I took her in and we x-rayed her, it was all gone. But for some reason, this puppy stayed alive and stayed inside of her, was not necrotic, and had been alive because it wasn't stiff, and it was the
Man,
weirdest thing. But it was the only time I never gave an oxytocin shot, and it was the only time I never x-rayed her before to know how many puppies I have, because my vet can nail it to the T. She knows exactly how many are in there, including the time I had 15. She could count, and she's good, so I generally know what's
yeah,
in
that's
there.
impressive. I've kinda given up on the pre-X-rays. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to it. Um,
I mean, they're pregnant at the
yeah,
time, they're ready to
yeah,
have
I don't
them,
know. It's like
but
sometimes I feel like
I just
you go there and you get the thing done, and I mean, I guess there is value in knowing, for sure. But,
yeah.
I don't know, I kinda stopped doing that. I was doing it for a while, and it may be that my current vet doesn't have an ultrasound machine, and that my older vet, I swear every time I went in there, the price just kept going up, and I'm like, "Why am I spending $300 to get?" I was like, "I have no control over this," so I don't know. I have mixed feelings on it.
I never ultrasounded with the exception of my AIs. I only
Well, yeah.
X-rayed all
Yeah,
my
I guess
litters,
I should have
but
clarified that
yeah.
my current vet, his X-ray machine isn't the quality that I would. Yeah, I
Okay,
said that
that's
wrong.
right.
It wasn't
Yeah.
ultrasound, it
Right,
was
right.
yeah.
Right, right.
I was doing the ultrasounds at one point, now I'm just like, either you're pregnant or you're not, and I'm not spending the money, I really don't. I mean, either you took or you
Yeah,
didn't. And for me,
Usually it's about a week later
Yeah, for
anyways.
me, interestingly enough, um, and I don't know if it's just that I know my dogs well or what, I don't know, but anytime that I've ever gotten a live tie, I've always had a litter. Now, I will say I've had a dog that I produced here on 3 different occasions. Twice I couldn't even get her tied, and then this last time I basically had to force her, and we got a tie, and she still didn't take. So I don't know if this is the female. It's not my dog, and I don't know her heat cycle. And the last time when I told the guy this was the third time we were going to try, I said this time I want her a month early. I kind of had been tracking her heat schedules. I was like she should come in March. I was like I want her in second week of February. We'll bring her here. I'll keep because she's out on a chain with him. So I was like, I will keep an eye on her and understand what her schedule was. And she was really receptive to the male, but every time he tried to get by, she would barrel roll. She wasn't being mean and she wasn't trying to get nasty, but she would barrel roll and try to break my damn hand, trying to hang onto her collar. And finally, the one night I just got mad at her and yelled at her to stand there. And she's like, oh, okay. And then we got the tie, but then for whatever reason, it didn't take, which was awkward because I used the same male in another breeding at the exact same time and had 14 puppies. So I knew it wasn't the male. So I don't know, but let's move on. Um, so we kind of covered puppy evals. How much are you doing with following your litters after they go to their pet homes? And what are you expecting back from your owners as far as just feedback?
I check for a lot of things. I'm checking for teeth. I want to know what their bites are because I want to know what traits are consistent and kind of coming through. I'm asking them to check full dentition because I have a line that does throw some missing bottom premolars at the back. Um, hold on a second. Quit. This puppy's going
No,
crazy.
you're
I'm
good.
sorry. So I'm checking. I want to know what's going on in their teeth because you can't see that in a picture. I'm looking for side profiles, front and back. I'm asking them to check feet because I've had a little bit popping up with some long toes here and there. I want to see, I know my dogs and what's happening within the people that show me stuff, but I want to know all the little traits. Because I can see everything else on a dog usually, but usually feet are hidden in grass and teeth you can't see. I start asking a lot of questions about temperament. I ask about allergies, if there's any sensitivities popping up. I want to know if that's a problem, if there's a certain trait. Um, Temperaments, a lot of the basic stuff. So then the pet people, I have a litter chat for all my litters now, and I let them talk to help each other out. And it's interesting what pops up. So little quirks that'll pop up, like, do they are they dicks? Are they food resource guarding? Is there anything consistent that's popping up? I like to hear that. I like to know, is there something I need to be concerned about? And does it correlate back to a line or is it just a one off? So to speak. So
Yeah.
I ask a lot of them, even my pet people.
Interesting. So there's a couple things here I want to touch on. Um, Allergies. So
Yep.
for me, and this is just my take, and I want to let everybody know I'm not a medical professional. This is my opinion as well. These are your opinions. If you're having issues, these are all topics you can look into yourself. Maybe I'll put some links in the comments on this thing. Um, but with allergies, I am of the firm belief most dogs start showing allergies in that second and or third year. And almost in every time, those dogs are getting annual vaccinations, which I am not a big proponent of. I am a proponent of going through your puppy schedule that your vet will normally take you through, and then, by law here in the United States, most places you have to keep your rabies up. But as far as all the other vaccines, I don't revaccinate till most dogs are about 5 or 6 years old, and or if I'm rehoming them, then I'll vaccinate them. Um, I have never ever since I've gotten away from annual vaccinations ever had issues with allergies. No pocking on the heads, no issues with the ears. I had a dog, um, many moons ago, had a dog. He lived to 13 years old. He got his annual vaccination schedules. He was plagued with allergies, mostly in his ears, to where he would shake them so bad that he would get hematomas. We would have to drain him. He lived most of his life on prednisone. He made it to 13 before we had to put him down, but it was a hard last 7 years. And I had read an article um, not too long ago, and I think I have it posted on my website, but, talking about the correlation between the protein used in vaccines, which is typically either egg or chicken, which is typically what you see most people claim their bulldogs are allergic to. "Oh, it's the chicken food. We can't give them anything with chicken in it." And have you gone down that deep dive at all with annual vaccination schedules and correlations between having allergies in this breed? Because I feel like a lot of times that vets will say that something is quote unquote part of this breed, and it really isn't. A lot of this stuff is because of these.
Shouldn't
Yeah,
be.
well, a lot of these, I think a lot of things are a product of a pre-programmed vet that says, "I need you in here once a year for annual vaccinations. We need to get your dog on heart guard. We need to have your dog on flea and tick medication." And they just pump these dogs full of so much stuff that you really don't know what is causing what in the end, with all these different aspects of, not just the allergies, but, you know, cancers and other things that pop up later in life. And for me, I feel like a less is better with these dogs. If you're breeding healthy stock, they shouldn't need all this other stuff. And most of the stuff that they're vaccinating you for isn't anything that's even remotely around you. So it's almost kind of fruitless. Now, if you're taking your dog to boarding and stuff, sometimes they require you to do that, but there are boarding
Yeah.
facilities that will take them without it.
So I think every area has different kind of regulations. My dogs are done. I try to get them on a vaccination schedule that it's a vaccine that can, we if it's a certain disease, we're trying to, do like we try to stretch it out over the 3-year period for some, like, the longest not to do choose a vaccine every year. Now, I never used to I do ivermectin myself. I don't do heart guard. I only did flea and tick a little bit recently because there's been a bunch of Lyme's disease popping up and a lot of ticks. Kinda getting away from it. Like, I did it for, like, 2 years just because I was hiking a lot during COVID, and I was getting into a lot of brush and just a lot, just being proactive, but this is from the nutritionist side of me, this is what we know. There's no rhyme or reason for allergies necessarily, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of reasons. So we do know there's genetics. We do know that if a dog gets sick, let's say a dog gets parvo or gets just another really bad respiratory disease when it's a puppy, before it's developed its full immune system entirely, it sends off a whole bunch of other issues later in life that's going to affect its immune system. If, a dog doesn't get enough colostrum, for instance, we know that colostrum in the first 48 hours protects it drives their immune system up. There's so many factors that could affect that later in life, but at the same time, as a breeder, I'm not about to start breeding dogs with allergies. If it popped up and I saw something popping up, I might want to think about it. I had one litter and I had some sensitivities popping up. Didn't seem to make any sense, and it happened around the same age. It seemed to be a bit environmental in a few puppies. Think it's gone away on one litter. But at the same time, I wanna keep an eye on that and make sure if I tie back those bloodlines, is it gonna pop up? But I can honestly say from an allergy standpoint, I've been pretty fortunate to keep it very, very minimal. And at the same time, I'm also not gonna make a claim, "Hey, I'm never gonna produce an allergy," because it's gonna happen, but sometimes it's not genetics, and sometimes there's other factors like too much vaccinations, like not getting enough colostrum, like getting sick as a puppy. And those things are factors to a lot of things later in life. And you're right. The vets say that the breed is riddled with it, but it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't
Yeah, I
be.
just question if any of these dogs, regardless of the breed, isn't just a product of some of these kind of cookie cutter veterinary practices. I want to go back to something that you said earlier when we were talking about the litters, and I asked you about your methodology in raising your keeper pup, and you made mention, and this is something I stress as well. You made mention about um, not taking your dog out to a lot of places when they're puppies because they truly aren't totally vaccinated or immune from some of these things, especially like parvo, which would really set a dog back and almost for the rest of its life size wise. But um, i- what is your typical um, vaccine schedule with your litters?
My litters. I do all my litters. And this question came up because I sold a few puppies to the USA rate recently, and they have different protocols in those areas. But I deworm with 2 different dewormers, and I vaccinate once. So I do, 1 dewormer 2 as close to 2 days before whelping as possible, and, the other dewormer at 2, 4, 6, and 8 weeks. And I do the vaccination, the 4-way, um, at right before they go home. So I do a full vat exam, and keep in mind, in Canada, you can't buy vaccines off the shelf like you can in the USA. But I look at it this way, I'm providing a health guarantee to these puppies. I want the vet checking every tiny little thing, and I'm willing to pay for it because I wanna know if there's something I can't see. So I get her to do all my that vaccine, and it's also gonna be a different protocol if puppies are flying to Europe. Um, and so at 8 weeks is when they're done, and I try to do it about 48 hours before they leave at 8 weeks. So it's usually like 8 weeks minus 2 days that I get those vaccines done. And then for me, I'll follow up at 12 weeks and then at 16 weeks, and that's when I do the rabies.
Yeah, so I do the exact same thing, except I don't do I don't you said you worm the bitch, like, 2 days before whelping? Is that what you yeah.
Yes, so I use, Safeguard 2 days
Mhm.
before, and this is a protocol because something I've noticed that even 2-week-old puppies, when you deworm them, they'll
Yeah, oh
shit
yeah,
out
100%.
worms. And anybody who says they don't deworm the puppies or they do it once, I don't know what they're thinking because every puppy at 4 weeks, kid you not, you'll at least get some kind of worm, and there's nothing nastier than 4-inch worms coming out of 4-week-old puppies. So I started, my vet suggested doing the bitch, 2 days before with, 1 dewormer, and then doing the bitch of the puppies at 2, 4, 6, and 8, and then that's when I do all the adult dogs on the property too to make sure I do them usually at the 4-week and the 8-week or try to keep them on the same schedule so that it's kinda the same kinda you're kicking that cycle
Yeah,
properly.
yeah, it's interesting. I guess I never thought about doing the bitch. Now, I will say that, not all of my females actually pass worms. I know Sugar never passed worms, but anything off of India did, and it seems like if they were born with worms as a bitch, they will have worms and pass those along, to their pups. And again, I don't see how anybody doesn't do a 2, 4, 6, 8, worming schedule. You know, I guess it depends on when you whelp, if you or when you wean, excuse me.
I've had them come out in the middle of the
No, I'm
winter.
saying, like
I'm not even
no, I'm
kidding
not talking
you.
about the time of the year, but I'm saying, like, if for some reason I had to do an early wean, like, at 4 weeks I weaned, um, it
Yeah.
maybe you could get away without doing the 8 weeks thing, but, yeah, I think it's still in good practice for as cheap as it is, and I do the exact same thing, and just to go on record, I've always taken my pups to the vet to get a look over, just like you said, because ultimately, in the way that I do things, I require my puppy owners, they've got to get to their vet, and I tell them before they even come here to get,
Then
yeah, within
48
48
hours.
hours before they even get to come pick up their pup, they need to get their appointment set up so they don't have any excuses. And then that way, if their vet hears something or sees something that mine didn't, the two can communicate as professionals. And it's not my word
Yep.
versus theirs. And I've never had anything
Yeah.
happen. If my vet has heard something, typically the puppy owner's vet has heard the same thing or seen the same thing.
Yep.
So I think it's just good practice. I'm not a big fan of not doing that. It does cost depending on the litter size, it can cost a good
Yeah.
chunk
Yeah.
of money, but I think it's just a good way about doing things. Um,
Yep.
okay. Um, let's talk about, we had talked about earlier about structure. Um, and I feel like we all find importance in making sure a dog has good structure. Um, but the thing that I've been pondering lately is that breeds were always formed based on a purpose. So, I think if we had a rat problem and we found one dog really killed rats well enough, and then we found another female that killed rats. We kinda bred those 2 together, and then we had some offspring, found another dog that killed rats kinda good, and we start putting them together. Eventually, genetics are gonna hone themselves out, and you're gonna kinda have a type, if you will, but it was all based on this function. If everybody did the function well enough, it had value for us to breed those dogs and do it with a purpose. Then now in more modern times, you know, we have dog shows, and with the evolution of all dog breeds, not just American Bulldogs or working breeds, um, we've got this new kind of time that we live in where these dogs don't really have to work their purpose. If you they're not really being bred. Most people aren't breeding for a catch dog or for a specific sport dog or um uh, you know any type of utility work. Most people have these dogs in a pet environment. Maybe they do some other stuff with their dogs, but when we talk about evaluating what I'll call the show standard structure, if if a dog is a high performing dog, and I'll use my dogs as example. I've got one line of my dogs, they're just not really show dogs. They are supreme athletes, but they're all a little turned out in the front, they're all a little turned out in the back. They can run 20 miles a day and do it with no issue. And then I could take another dog that I could show to a grand champion that would gas out after 15 minutes, has got great structure, you know, assuming all the breathing and everything is equal between the 2 lines, why would I find that, that the grand champion is a better dog when I look at the better performing dog, albeit the structure isn't as nice, but the performance level is just 1,000 times more. Do you think that, like, evaluating these show structures aren't really correlating with regards to the function of a dog?
So my take on it is form supports function. I hear a lot of people say form over function or function over form. And in my opinion, if you're a show person, you're going to say form over function. And if you're a working person and don't show, you're going to say function over
Mhm.
form. But my take on it is this: form supports function. Now, your experience where your high performing athletes might not do as good in the show ring is probably because you're talking about bully dogs. And a lot of the bully dogs, they want maybe a little bit more substance, or the bully ring doesn't seem to support as much of a fit dog. Where in the standard ring, it's almost expected that they better be a fit dog. So that could be maybe the difference between those. Now, how I breed is I breed for I breed for a lot of things. I want a dog that can do anything. I want a dog that can be a pet. I want a dog that can go catch a hog. I want a dog that can go do sport work or something that it is good at. It doesn't need to do everything really well in sport. But I also wanted to walk into the show ring and then guess what? My kids walk into that show ring with them. And you know what? In my dogs, I literally have dogs that will do all that and have produced all that. I have produced from PSA to Schutzen to weight pull to dogs that catch a lot of catch dogs, come out of Canada and drop them into Georgia, and he caught a crap ton of hogs. And then even my dogs that come from Canada, we drive all the way down south and we go do catch work with them. Not all my dogs are the same exact type, but my dogs still do well in the show ring and fit the standard and still work. Where you will find a difference is those dogs that are heavily muscled, just like a human being. A dog that's going to be absolutely jacked is not going to run a fitness race. I am not made to be an endurance runner. I am made to be a powerhouse person. Not much different than, yes, you're going to have standard dogs that can go, 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 but they don't pack the same punch, so to speak. So, some of my dogs that tend to be heavily muscled, I've heard judges say they're too big for the standard ring. That's okay. But at the same time, those might be the dogs that might not have the same endurance, even though you're right. They breathe good, they handle the heat, etc. But that muscle density doesn't fly for an endurance style dog.
1,000% right there. Yeah,
So,
1,000%. I don't mean to
yeah,
cut you off, but yeah,
no,
I
that's
have
cool.
the heavily muscled stuff, and I'm kinda known for that, and then, the dogs that I will refer to as, like, the high level athlete have always been much leaner, have a lot less substance, and maybe people would argue that they lack type. And I wanna back up, and this is kind of a thing that I've seen lately, and I wanna talk about a couple different things with what you just mentioned. So let's back up to the bully ring. And,
Yeah.
um, so first and foremost, you know, when we talk about this breed being a working breed, and you get into a bully ring and you see you've got let's say I'm there and I've got my super athlete, lean, tall, muscled up but very lean, an endurance runner. And then you got over here maybe in the middle, maybe you got a power lifter that's got maybe good height and some size on it. And then there's also the other dogs that are, I don't even, maybe even a little bit beyond the power lifter, and they're kind of more just like a cool trophy piece, like a cool looking typey dog. Um, do you think that there should be more priority put on the that the dog should, if we were in a show ring as a judge, which you're not a judge, correct? You haven't done any of that?
Not in the dog
Okay, yeah,
ring,
okay,
no.
so I'm not a judge either,
Yeah.
but, do you think there should be a higher priority for, first and foremost, the dog needs to look like it fits the part, that it could go out and do a job,
Correct.
any job, like just a general priority job, and then B, maybe it's structure, temperament, and then movement, or, or some other shuffle of the deck behind that, but without that, like, initial priority of, like, being able to function and do a job, um, I feel like the rest of it really is purposeless.
I think when the first few sentences in the breed standard states what the purpose for the breed is, and it states right in that, should have substance, should be a powerful breed, and this is what it's made for. If it doesn't look like it can do that, then you go to the next part. The way the breed standards are made, and how they're taught to the judges. Again, I've kind of apprenticed a little bit in a ring just to get a different perspective, more on the bully side. I had a really hard time judging bully dogs. Like when I stepped into apprentice, I had a really hard time because part of me wants to pick that hybrid type dog and not that big fat dog. And I have a hard time evaluating a fat sloppy dog against a nice typey, moderate type dog. And to me, I know what I would float towards, but the breed standard has to be able to, and all breed standards are different. They're going to put priorities on certain things. And you're right. If the start of the breed standard says the dog should be powerful and it should be of X, Y, and Z or whatever the description is, it should look to fit that type.
So let's talk about type. So initially,
Hmm.
all dogs were formed based on function, and then the type
Yep.
of the dog came along after, line breeding on a handful of dogs that were good at that function. So I see a lot of people now, on the internet or on Facebook, social media, that are all about type, type, type. You know what I mean? It's like type, 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 type. Well, if the dog doesn't have type, how can you have a breed? And I think it's kind of a misnomer for me because it just doesn't seem purposeful to go, I think when people start breeding for type, we start to find ourselves at either extreme, small fine bone, kind of more, uh, I guess, endurance running standard dogs versus these extremely big, heavy boned, bully dogs. And everybody's fighting for this quote unquote type, but all the same, we may be losing a lot of function. Um, how important do you think that type should really be? And after you answer that, how do you feel about just having 2 standards in general? Because it would seem to me that if we wanted to progress the breed into what it was truly meant to be, we should all be breeding to the middle and finding that, like, that true hybrid dog and not living out in these outliers of extremes.
Um, so for type, I think here's a problem. Nobody knows what type should be. Everybody has their own version of a type. And some people's type is just a big head. Big head doesn't necessarily mean anything if its eyeballs are out here or point in this direction. If, they can't breathe, if its face is smashed in, if it's got wrinkles like an English bulldog. Like nobody knows what a type should be because the problem is everybody has their own idea and nobody wants to everyone's too busy arguing with each other to work together. And people don't want to go to shows because they gripe that the people at the shows, the dogs can only do left hand circles. Well, I guarantee you at our shows in Canada, the dogs that are going left hand circles are also the same dogs that are performing in the working events. The dogs that aren't showing up generally are the ones that sit on the couch. But so that function becomes so important. So we really push the function aspect of it in legal functions in Canada because there are things that aren't done in Canada, like hog hunting. It's just they exist in really remote places, but it's not really something that's totally legal, nor is really safe, so to speak, for the dog. But from a functioning standpoint, there's so many things that these American Bulldogs can be doing. UKC offers so much. Do something, even if it's nose work or agility. But why can't these dogs do it? Well, the reality of it is people are too lazy, and most of these dogs don't get off the couch. So from a standpoint of the type, I show NKC and I like showing in the standard ring, but I get a lot of heat in the standard ring because my dogs float towards the hybrid side because they carry so much substance and bone. But I show in UKC and we all show together. Interestingly enough, the dogs that show up are still the dogs that float towards the middle. There's still those hybridy dogs that can go either. There's some dogs that could go either way or don't do a really good job in UKC because they have, a bully bite and a standard body or whatnot. That's what's showing up in UKC anyways. And those are the dogs that are still having success in NKC and ABKC. We won't even talk about that because they only recognize one part of the breed anyways. And we just don't have ABA here because it's just not close for us. So at the end of the day, most of the dogs that are showing kind of float towards the middle anyways.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, still think down in NKC, we still see some heavier.
There's
Yeah, there
extremes.
still is. I think it's
There's
there's
extremes. We have
fewer. Yeah,
too,
there's
but
fewer. So, in general, how do you feel about having the 2 types? Do you think there's any advantage to just putting all the dogs together?
it brings more dogs out. Honestly, it brings more dogs out. People don't show up in UKC. In UKC, it's really hard to champion a dog, let alone brand a dog in Canada. Barely anybody go to the show. Like 3 people, if anything. You're lucky to get 3 bulldogs at a UKC show. I just recently went to a show and it was my 2 dogs. I In Michigan, where there's a whole lot of shows and a whole lot of bulldogs showing, that's a different story because they have a whole bunch of bulldogs in Michigan and Indiana, I think. That's a bit of a different story. If I was closer and I could get there more often, I would. I'd love to be able to show in the rings with the bully dogs. And I sent one of my most standard puppies to premieres. And you know what? At 9 months, 10 months old, um, she won a best in breed at premieres against really top, really nice bully dogs. It's the interpretation of a judge in UKC. So it could go either way. In a UKC, when you're showing all the types together, it's at the discretion of the judge.
Mhm.
And some days you're gonna do well, and some days you're
So,
not. In NKC, it gives people a place to show both, and I'm okay with that as a show host because it draws people out.
yeah, I guess in the
So,
UKC, do they still recognize the 2 types and judge the dog
yes,
to each type? Okay. That's interesting.
yes,
Yeah, I've
yes.
I've toyed. I had some dogs I thought would do well in the UKC. I probably still have some dogs that would do well in the UKC. I think it's just really,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
it's
would.
just a time thing for me now. So let's go back and we'll talk into your program a little bit more. Um, Out of the breedings that you've done well, let's start with this. So, have your goals changed since you got into your breeding program versus where they're at now? Has anything changed along the way? I know we always get a little bit more experience, um, but I've seen a lot of breeders start in one aspect of this breed and then for whatever reason or another move to another aspect. Have you kinda stayed consistent with where you started versus where you are now and what your goals are? Or have you had a big shift in your breeding program?
I think I've stayed fairly consistent in that I want an all-around dog. In the beginning, of course, I was learning and exploring what was available, what was to do, what did well in the ring and what performed and how that supported it. As a whole, I've still stayed with the, you know, blocky, standard type dog with an all around temperament that can do a lot of different things. And I'm still doing that. And I'm still producing that now. This year, you would say I'm probably having my first 2 real hybrid breedings where I'm actually using like a hybrid bully, but the dogs actually kinda have a standard-ish body with a more bully head, um, with purpose. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those breedings, I'm gonna be keeping something within my program. I'm actually doing that potentially for others. Um, but for my program, I'm still with that goal. I still want that wide muzzled, good pigment, good moving dog that on a temperament basis, my kids can still handle, which is a new thing. My kids are handling my dogs, and that I can still go hog hunt with or do some type of sport work. If it's not bite work, do something else. So it's still fairly consistent, although maybe the dogs might look I don't know, I still think they look fairly similar today from the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say so too. I think, some of that the one litter, I think the Apollo litter maybe, or is Apollo and Orcus from the same litter?
No, Orcus and Maple are from the
Okay.
same litter. Fireball and Apollo are
Okay.
from the
Yeah,
same
I
litter.
maybe I had that crossed in my head. But yeah, some of
But
those.
that breeding with Dio and Fireball is very similar to what I'm gonna be doing with Maple. and
Yeah,
Apollo, so it's gonna be like a flip
yeah.
with them.
I've got
So,
something planned like that as well, where I've taken the female litter mate, bred it to I'm gonna do the same breeding in reverse, basically the same thing you're doing.
yeah.
Um, which I'm curious to see how that plays out. Um, and which breedings that you've done so far do you think are the most notable for you, or do you think that have clicked the best?
Anything out of Katie looks real nice. Like, Katie produced keep in mind that the breeding with Katie to Blue, Blue's sire, Moose, and Katie's mom, Sin, were litter mates. So, that muscle and that type, even though Orgus and Maple don't size-wise and marking wise don't look the same. If you actually took his size and put it down to her, they're actually cut the same. Heavy muscled, good bone, clean, like, really good lines, move, very similar. Very similar to Deal. Like, you literally can, it's like taking Maple and going like this to Deal. And it's just like Deal and Orcus are about as similar as you are going to get. When you put those two in the ring side by side, holy crap, the judges, they struggle. And then whenever they went into the breed ring against Apollo, who is kind of floats over to the bully side, man, let me tell you, I stood back and I watched the judges sweat a bit.
Well,
They had a hard time with
I
them. So what's cool now is I'll get messages from people I couldn't be at nationals the last few years for various reasons, and they're like, "Yeah, I picked out a Roper dog right off the hop," and that's become kind of cool that people are picking out that type
so,
um, that I'm known for producing.
yeah, and it's interesting you say that. So, when you when you got started, was the goal to produce a recognizable bloodline? Was that part of
I don't know if I don't know if I had that, but what I did like is that I could look at other people's programs and I'd be like, "That's a gunslinger dog," that was a chestnut little Indian dog, and I could say the same thing in certain bully programs too. And now I never really realized that I actually became known for that of my own style.
Yeah, I
So
think
it's
for me
been
yeah,
cool.
I think for me, that was really at the forefront of kind of what one of my goals was, still is that a recognizable bloodline. Now, I've tried to keep 2 things they've crossed over and intermixed, but I definitely am trying to keep 2 separate lines, um, kind of afloat based on their own phenotypes, um, just because it's fun for me. I mean, to be honest with you, it's just fun. And I love the flexibility in the breed. Um, would you consider this breed still a band dog breed when we talk about no one can no one can no one can decide or agree upon a type that these dogs should be? Do you feel like it's just kind of a more organized band dog?
To be honest, I think you're gonna hear it in every breed. You're gonna hear the same arguing in every breed. You're gonna hear the same arguing in every species. It's in horses too. So I mean, we can talk about the breed all they want, but I think it's cool that it's not a cookie cutter breed. I think it's kind of nice that someone could ask on a board, "Hey, I'm looking for a bulldog puppy." And if anybody's smart, they're going to say, "What style? What temperament are you looking for? What's its purpose?" And you could fit them within the breed. I like that. But at the same time, then people could argue. And to me, I'm okay with it because guess what? There's only one of me, and my style is a lot different than a lot of people in Canada, and I'm okay with that. So if somebody said, "Hey, I want something for a show or for a certain style," we might send 'em to somebody else in Canada, and that happens. And people come and they say, "I want this." I'll send them to other breeders because I think they're gonna produce more of what that person's looking
Yeah, I've
for.
definitely had to do that as well, and mostly most of the time for me, it's a size thing. Most people, they'll be like, "I want a 120-pound male." It's like, you're not gonna get it from me, and I can tell you unequivocally, you're not gonna get it out of a certain line of my dog just because they don't have enough mass to them. Um, But if you called me up and said, "Hey, man, I run, 12 miles a day and I want my dog to come with me," I can do that for you, and I can do it in
Yeah.
a bully package. Um, but, yeah, I've def
And you make that valid point because some people I recently had a guy come to me and he was really concerned about the whole breaky concept. And the bully look, people will say, "Hey, I don't want that bully look, but I want the
Mm.
substance." Or, "I do want the bully look, your dogs don't really look like it." And I'm like, "Cool, I'll find that for you." Because there's that's the cool part about the breed is that there's 2 kinda different muzzle types, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I still kinda go back to just the general disagreement. I mean, if you look up American Bulldog and on Google and you go through pictures, man, you're gonna see everything and then some. I think it was a
Yep.
little bit more relatable probably, 25 years ago when you were really into the Johnson bloodline. I think those dogs, the actual Johnson stuff really kinda had a lot of similarities that stood out. And then there's other people that have done it more recently, like, Jeff Daly. I think a Daily dog is very recognizable. Um, and that head type, he's really found a way to kinda hone in on those traits and make it recognizable, and I still see people that own some stuff off of him that, can even look a little standard, to be honest with you. But, I think for the most part, though, 8 out of 10 dogs are very recognizable, and you can tell that. Um, so out of your more notable breedings, who would you say now is has it Blue and Scully? Is that the face of the program? Is that the end goal that everything's going to kind of revolve around them um, until maybe you produce
Yeah.
something more? I mean, Dio is very similar to Blue, so if let me ask you this. So now that you've produced Dio and he's very similar to Blue, but he's a little bigger, okay? Do you and he's a little
He's a
yeah,
lot bigger. Yeah.
and he's more tightly bred.
Yeah.
Do you feel like now he has more value than Blue? Be
No, because I think it depends on the program. And, there's different people that are going to look at Dio and go, holy crap. And let me tell you, Dio hasn't even traveled to the US yet to go to a show. And most judges that have come up or people that have come up here and looked at them and they go, holy crap, that dog's big. You have to see him to understand how muscled and how heavy, and how big he is. Um, I did the same thing with Scully. And Scully didn't look that big in pictures until you walked out and you went, wow. And then they go and they look at Blue and they go, "Whoa, he's not as big as I thought he was." But in photos, it's just like, he's balanced in his proportions. Blue and Scully are always gonna be the face for me because my program is built around them, and now I'm taking the 2 of them and combining them, and Blue and Scully combined and Phoebe, like, that's what got me Dio, and dogs like him, and all my dogs now are those combinations off of him. Maple is Katie to Blue, and Katie is a Scully daughter. A lot of what I have now, I'm deeper in Scully bloodlines than I'm actually in Blue, and a lot of people think Blue influences my program. No, Scully has actually given me that last generation of female that's got me to where I am now. So my 3 females here now are all Scully granddaughters, and I'm gonna take one of them back to him and see what I get with his semen that I have frozen. And just keeping that nice combination and just being aware of where the weaknesses are and where they might pop up, and then knowing when to bring in that other blood, like the puppy I brought in from, Germany, like, just knowing how to mix that together. Um, Sometimes I have to be willing to do a breeding and place them with other people and watch them, as opposed to just keeping it here and letting somebody else put the time and the work into them before I keep something next.
Yeah, I mean, how prone are you now to even keep a male? I know you just got a
I
I
don't
mean,
need
I know
anything.
you just got a male puppy. I think a lot of people,
Yeah.
and I was just thinking about this on my drive home today. I was there's a show coming up in April, and, I'm trying to get my ducks in a row. It looks like we can line up to get out. Now, where I'm at is I'm like, what dogs am I gonna bring to this thing? And I've got a lot of dogs. I mean, I've just got a lot of dogs here. I've got a lot of dogs elsewhere. Um, the dogs here are all in a position where they're all competing against each other for the most part. I only have one puppy. If Sway can get her shit together, I'll probably try to drag her out because she's an exceptional dog. And what I guess where I was going with this, I started thinking about like, "Oh, I got this mail and maybe I can grab that mail off this couch and I got that mail." And I started thinking, I was like,
Get your females
"Well, no,
out.
I have no, I always
It
bring my females." But,
yeah.
my point was I started looking at these males thinking in my head, who I have out there, and I'm like, gosh, these dogs are getting older. I gotta shit or get off the pot if I'm gonna use them. I mean, I've got some really nice males that I really like to try to use in a breeding, and it doesn't take a lot of time for these dogs to get old kinda quick, and then you're like, "Oh, shit, my back's up against the wall. I gotta get something off of these things if I wanna use them." Because, I mean, even for me, I think, initially I went off yard and started the program with foundation females, and just like yourself, had produced a couple really nice males, and then you start using those dogs, and I'm still using profit. Like, I still haven't maximized everything that I'd like to get out of him in his breeding career. And he's 8 or 9 now, maybe 8. So he's getting up there, and, you know, now unfortunately everything that I own is related to him, but, so we're have to start thinking about going off yard or doing something different. But I think a lot of people just have this like I think when you get into this breed, if you're most men that get into the breed just feel like this need to always have these big males as be a part of your program, and you end up with all these males on your yard. But at the end of the day, you can only do so many breedings each year, and you can only use those males so often. For me, keeping them here and feeding them 362 days out of the year to just need them for 3 for a breeding doesn't make sense. I just that's just I've always kept the females. I've always felt value in keeping the females, having the relationship with the females. I feel like they do a lot more and have a lot more purpose for breeding. The males are important, and I think, you know, for me, I don't feel the need, albeit right now I have 3 males on property. Um, I it's not where I wanna be. I would prefer to have maybe 2. I probably could live with none. But I think that, you always have that trust issue out there that you can't always just, I wouldn't have necessarily put Profit in a co-owned home. There was just no way he was gonna get out from underneath my care. Um, do you
Yeah.
find the same?
But it's a lot easier to put males in co-owned homes than females, and especially pet owner type co-owned homes, and get something back out of
Yeah,
them.
100%.
And there Marcel Tournois and I have had some good discussions. You know what he says? He says, "The power is in the females." And I forget his exact words that he said, but he's like, "Keep females, work females, show females." Lots of people out there are keeping there's males out there.
Yeah,
Focus on your females, and that's why I've got 3 females sitting here, one night almost 9-year-old male and a puppy. And for the longest time, it was the opposite, where my females were with other people, and it was hard to take those females out of that home away from them, and then it was hard to find good female co-owners, so my focus has been a little bit on what's here. And you know what? I'm enjoying working females right now because they're a lot less hard on my body when I'm
yeah,
broke than trying to handle 2 big males when I'm working them. And guess what? Here's the other thing. My kids can show my females. Maybe my daughter because can't because she's tiny. But my son, he's showing my females. In fact, he fights me at the shows to take the better one. And I've got handlers. I'm fighting with other breeders to keep my son handling my dogs because they're trying to steal him to handle their adult
that's
dogs.
funny.
And you know what? It's nice to have that. It's nice to not have to worry about that. But you're right. Like I'm in a spot right now. Do I really need to keep any more males? Especially when I've got Katie who's being bred a final time and I've got a female from her last two breedings sitting here. I don't need a Katie son. I'm gonna let other people do stuff with them. And then maybe later if I need them once, that's fine. But what you're right. Here's a fun fact. Scully was used by one breeder in Europe, and there's one breeding left sitting there available. I used him and then once, and then Sheriff and Beaver used him once. Nobody ever used him. A lot of people asked, but nobody in the US wants to take a drive to Canada to use a stud. And Blue has never been used by a single breeder in USA. Lots of people ask. Nobody wants to drive up to use them. So why do I want to? And plus, I've got Dio and Sobak, who we haven't even got a chance to talk about. But he's so they're so closely related. I've limited him what my abilities are. So why are people going to drive up to Canada when they can get something nice and close to them and cheap and easy? They're
Yeah,
not.
I think a couple.
So why keep males,
Right.
right?
Well, I think there's a couple points, and I think my what I was trying to say was like, I think as a man, most men breeders have this tendency to feel like they got to have this big prowess group of males to show off their program, and they take up space in their yard on on having all these males that, and they find out very quickly that you just can't continually. You gotta just pick your lane with what you're using, and that could just be you could literally live off one male for 5 or 6 years and really do some good in your program versus trying to bounce around and do a bunch of different stuff. Um, there was something else I was good yeah, so you raise a really good point, and this is really the foundation, a part foundation of this channel, podcast, whatever you wanna call it. Um I've really noticed in the last, mm, probably 5 or 7 years that people just aren't breeding and working together anymore. Like, I just see people using whatever dog either they produced or whatever's convenient and close, um, and then the next breeding, they're just picking something else and running with that. There's, like, no breeding plan, and there's just a lack of attention to detail when it comes to putting dogs together. Um, and you made a point. You said that, you know, nobody in the States has used Blue and only a handful of people have used Scully. And both of those dogs have a fair bit of litters to evaluate what could come out of it. You know, for me, Profit, I think he's either on litter 6 or 7, has at least a champion or more in every litter. Obviously, he produced, I think it was a 2021 Dog of the Year with Kruger, Supreme Grand Champion. So there's a lot of dogs out there. I know Maggie's got some like this that have are proven. When I say proven producers,
Yep.
actually have adult offspring to look at and evaluate. And as a breeder, um,
And doing something, showing, and health
yes.
tested,
Yeah,
all
and
three.
but again, I have never well, I take that back. 2 times somebody else has used Profit, um, and that's it, and I've had very few, if any, other inquiries on using him, but you'll see people on Facebook or any other social media, "Oh, what studs are out there?" This, that, or the other, but at the end of the day, they never take into consideration how many litter like, the first thing I want as an experienced breeder is I wanna see offspring. Like, I wanna see what this dog produces. I wanna see as many of them as I can. Pictures or in person, doesn't matter. I just wanna see I don't wanna see the 2 best puppies that he's ever produced. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And if he hasn't produced anything, I don't think I'm at a point in my career where I wanna take a chance on it. I would rather use something that I have that is untested, but I know the blood versus stepping out and using something else that's completely untested. Um,
Well, and that's why when people came to me about blue versus Dio, they're looking at adult Dio and they're like, "Could I use blue? Could I use Dio?" And the comment was made when Laurent at Mighty Bull, he's like, "But if I use blue, I can get to Dio."
in theory,
Like, he's
yeah,
proven, and he went ki he hummed and hawed, and I hear that question from a lot of people that have come to me and talked to me, and I'm like, "Well, here's the pros and the cons." But guess what happens in the end? They kinda go they most of the times in the end, it's almost like you presented them with so much information, you've been so dead honest with them that they go to the next person who doesn't give the information, doesn't show it, and they take a chance on
yeah.
that because it's
Yeah,
closer.
yeah, I've definitely put my miles on to use some studs, and even if I'm using even one of the males I produce, there's a high probability I'm driving 5 hours to go get the damn male, and then I'm keeping him for the week in
Yeah.
my house with all these other dogs, and you're
Yep.
managing this other dog with different manners and everything else, just to get the breeding done to trek that son of a bitch on back to its home, give him the
Yep.
old attaboy, and there's a lot that goes into it. Um it
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm kind of in the same quandary with the Dio and Blue, um, situation as well. I inbred on India using Rico and Jamaica and produced a dog named Banksy. So Banksy is more tightly bred on India than obviously his sire, Rico. I I look at Rico, and I look at him. I like him in some aspects better than his son, but then I debate in my head, do do the concentration of genes have more value than the dog in front of me? You know what I mean? And I've
Yeah.
only done the one breeding with Rico, so I don't know, what else he can produce when he's not inbred on his own stuff. Um, and I'll get
Yeah.
down that road eventually, but again, it goes kind of back to it's like if you could only do 2 litters a year, and for me, um I typically use the female as the focal point, breeder to one male, breeder to another male, breeder to another male, with some separation so I can watch all that, and then I'll put them all on the shelf, and I'll go over to my other line, and I'll do stuff with that, and then by that time I come back, these are all 2 or 3 years old, I can see what worked, what didn't work, and then I bounce kinda back and forth between the 2 lines. But yeah, I'm kind of in that same quandary to see who's gonna end up being a better producer, and the unfortunate truth is, I don't know that I'll ever figure it out because I don't know that I'll be able to put out enough litters between the 2 dogs. You know what I mean? I've got
I don't think you
Yeah,
ever will. It's trying to work your little
yeah,
scientific little recipe and hope
yeah,
it
mm,
works, right? And pray you get what you're looking for.
yeah.
So,
So, we're getting close, I'm gonna wrap this thing up, but I had an interesting question that I thought, I wanna cover on 2 things, and we're gonna start with this one. Um, and think I can't remember if we talked about this earlier or it was in the part of the podcast that we lost, but, you had mentioned something about the purists in this breed, which I don't know why by what metric you would actually call yourself a purist, because I still am a firm
I'm
no, I'm
not.
still a firm believer that these are
I'm
band
not.
dogs, to some extent, but, so let's say that you've got a standard dog on pedigree and they don't always produce a standard dog, or they produce something that's hybrid or has a bully bite, or however you want to distinguish the two standards. Do you feel like that dog has less value because it doesn't only produce what is in front of you on the pedigree?
So, here's the kicker. When I refer to purists, I talk about the people that say your dog can't possibly be a standard because 7 generations ago there was a bully dog in the pedigree. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but if there's 6 generations behind it where it's standard, 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 and then the whole litter's standard, It's a freaking standard dog. I don't give a crap if there's a bully dog way back in there. This is a standard dog. And and these same purists are talking about this, and there's a freaking pit bull up front in their pedigrees. So that's where I'm talking about the purists, and they're like all anal and pissed off at the world because there's somebody in the standard ring with thick dogs in a standard ring. Well, guess what? It I might have thick dogs with heavy bone and muscle, and there's other breeders. I'm not the only one. Um, but what I'm going with that is I keep producing standard bites, and I've only had one breeding when I used an outcross that had very, very different pedigree and a very different phenotypic style about its head. Every single one of my dogs have been a standard bite and a standard muzzle to the point where some people don't even like that I produce majority scissor bites as opposed to reverse scissors. So tell me I'm not a standard breeder if I'm not producing that. And if you look at my muzzle lengths, there is people out there that'll criticize that my muzzle length's too long. And that's okay. But these purists literally harp on you because you've got substance and you've got size. Because 7 generations, 6, 8 generations back, there's a bully dog
Yeah.
there. And that's where I talk about that. And I do get majority like I produce one bully dog. That's it. And there's people that would argue, is he really a bully
Yeah,
dog?
well, everyone's gonna argue about something, that's for sure. Let me ask you this, and this is an interesting question. I'm gonna pull this from another podcast that I've listened to recently, and it was about a totally different breed, but, I think the general consensus as I see it now is that this breed was started up with a bunch of porch dogs, um, you know, trying to find dogs of similar type and then obviously paired with the function. And let's make an assumption that 3 to 4 other general breeds went into making the American Bulldog. Do you feel that it would ever be acceptable to reintroduce one of those other breeds back in to the American Bulldog if it was established that it was a foundation animal to the breed? So let's say, for example, not your style, but let's say, you know, initially there was an English Bulldog. Johnson used, an English Bulldog in his program, and do you think it would be ever acceptable to go back in and infuse that back in the breed if there was a reason to do so? Or, an American Pit Bull Terrier, is there a reason to bring that dog back? I mean, I still think it's up for debate. I think the Pit Bull guys still don't really know if the American Bulldog influenced their breed or that their breed influenced our breed, initially, especially on the standard side. Do you feel like there was be ever a time that it would be like, "Oh, it's okay to bring this back in because it was part of the foundation, and why shouldn't it be in there?"
Oh, I look at it this way is what's the purpose?
Well,
What do you need to add a pit bull? What do you need to add these other dogs back in? If our breed is so genetically diverse that if you have to go back to add one of the foundation breeds, whatever they may be that nobody can agree on, why why do you have to? It's probably because you can't work with the other people in the breed or nobody wants to work with you or you're to being too narrow focused. If you want to add a pit bull back in because you like certain traits, cool, but it's no longer a bulldog. The breed was created to get to a certain point, and we're so genetically diverse that there's so much out there and available. If you want to correct something or fix something, it's there. So why go back to the beginning? Because you're literally just stepping backwards
fair enough.
in terms of trying to create the
Yeah,
breed.
fair enough.
To me, you're literally just creating a band dog. You're going
Yeah.
backward to me.
Yes, yes, yeah. No, yeah. Fair enough. That's good enough. Um,
I probably go against what a lot of people say.
I've actually just I've been pondering it more myself, not that I would feel the need to crossbreed, but I start to ponder the ethics of it and like, okay, well, What if I did want to add this back in for the purpose of this? Like, if and I'm not just all hypothetical. If I had a pit bull that just had amazing structure in front of me, and I was like, oh, this is a white pit bull. It's going to fit in my standard colors that I choose to have. And if I think I could use that for one generation and then go just continually back with all my American Bulldog stuff to pick up that extra wind, maybe that drive and this beautiful structure, am I really doing myself a disservice or am I building better dogs? You know what I mean? Are we
So that
stipending ourselves by putting this, you know, it's a little bit of moral grandstanding, I guess, maybe. I don't know if that's exactly the right way to say it, but, trying to say like, "Oh, ultimately, we're trying to build the best dogs we can." Fortunately, we have a good foundation. There's a lot, especially if you start to line breed and inbreed, there's a lot that you can do, and you could possibly breed something in and breed it back out fairly quickly if you're skilled enough to do so. But if your ultimate goal is to build better dogs and that's how it gets done, I think I ponder the ethics of that myself. Now, to hide it is a totally different thing. I'm not saying I'm hiding it. I'm
yeah.
saying that I'm doing it out in the open. I'm going to do this. And then, 8 generations down the road, when Embark says it's 100% American Bulldog again, I'll go and register the damn thing. I just sometimes I think about those things as I drive because, you know, at the end of the day, some genetic diversity into another breed, maybe where this breed ends up going down the line. I could see that because there's just a lot of inexperienced people breeding to the extremes, and it's going to be hard to recover from that down the road. Um,
Well, what you know about dogs is people are using this on a small scale and testing things out. So scientific numbers, you would have a really hard time getting those numbers. What I know from cattle, because I work for a breed registry and I literally traveled across Canada registering animals, purebred, crossbreeds, and that process to get back, is that F1 generation is all pretty consistent. F2, all over the place. So a lot of people think, hey, a lot of Holstein breeders in Canada started bringing in genetics to try to change specific health traits. What they did was the first generation, they kind of got something nice. The next generation, it went completely out the window and it didn't work. And on a large scale, when you're looking at animals like cattle in an industry where you have a lot of numbers to look at, it becomes scientifically proven after. And I think the problem is with dogs, you're just dealing with a smaller scale and you don't get to look at the bigger
mhm,
picture.
fair enough. I'm going to end on this one. And this came to me the other day, and I thought maybe it was an interesting question to ask. So I think when a lot of people think about and and I'll also add that I'm not a person that's up to par with other breeds, but I think when most people think about dog breeding, especially maybe in the early 1900s going into maybe 1960s and 70s, we think about dog men, you know what I mean? Guys with dogs in their yards and just if somebody gives you a compliment and they say, "Oh, you're a real dog man," you know, that's like a good compliment from another breeder. Um, but I've noticed, definitely in the last 20 years for sure, there's a lot more women that are the forefront of a breeding program and arguably in our breed, um, more recently, I would say are kind of the leading the charge of maybe what I'll call the gold standard for what a breeding program should look like. Um, what do you think has contributed to more women getting into breeding as a whole? And what do you think separates men and women their approach to their breeding program that has led to this success?
Um, Less egos. I think men have a big ego, and When you see people fist pumping and posting narrow-minded videos or posts on Facebook and arguing, sure, women argue. Good Lord, we're good at it. But well, I don't know if good or effective, but I think that the thing with women is women are more meticulous, detailed, and they plan, and they're willing to make sacrifices in their life in a lot of things. And I think that you make a valid point. If I start talking about some of the top breeders of people that I've made references to lately, it's
Mhm.
been women. Sometimes it's even been women that I don't even talk to anymore for whatever reasons, and I've recently just recommended something on Facebook today, someone I haven't talked to in a few years, and it's been women. And I think because they pay attention to detail, they're diligent, they do everything that needs done, and they set plans and game plans. And that's not to exclude, like, yourself or
No.
anything, but I think there's a lot more of that in this breed. And, it could also be just the whole badass nature of the breed too. I don't know the history of why everybody else that I would look up to got into the breed, even my mentors, but I know the reason I got into the breed was I needed something to be protective for me. And I also think that if you look at the type of people that are handling these dogs, they're not your pushover women either. This is not a breed that is for pushovers as a whole, whether it be physically or mentally. And to handle these dogs, you can't be a weak ass individual. So I think that you just get that right type of determination in a woman, and you're getting women that are successful at it too.
I think it's a good place to end. Yeah, for me personally, when I think about programs and working together right now, honestly, it's probably almost all women. Yeah, that's kinda where I'm at. I mean,
That's a good
yeah,
point. I never even thought
yeah, I
about
mean,
that.
it's just with who I would work with and sharing. I mean, when I think about the dogs that are out right now and maybe for what I'm looking for, and I'm not saying there's not good men breeding programs out there because there are, but when I think about the full body of work and what I would want to merge with, that's probably where I would go right now. Um, and I was thinking about that the other night and, it kinda dawned on me. I was like, "Man, there's been some really notable women breeders in more recent times, and it seems to be, if I was looking at the gold standard of, you know, breeding programs, there's way more women than there are men." So that's an interesting point. So, I think we'll wrap it up here. I appreciate you coming back on and getting this thing concluded. Now I have to do all the due diligence of getting it back out. What I didn't ask last time that I'm gonna ask this time is where can people find your program? Website, Instagram? Do you have a Facebook page? YouTube? Where are you at?
I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram and I have a website. You just have to Google search Roper American
Okay. All
Bulldogs.
right. And is it roperamericanbulldogs.com?
Yep, roperamericanbulldogs.com, and then Facebook, it's Roper ABS,
Okay.
and Instagram, I think it's the same, Roper. I go by Roper. I try to keep my personal and my dog stuff separate.
Yeah, I get a lot of friend requests from dog people on Facebook, and not that I post a lot of my personal stuff on there, but I I don't I don't find the need to mix the 2. If you wanna find me on the dog stuff, go to Instagram or hit me up in a messenger or something like that, and that gets me to if you wanna
Yeah.
talk dogs, let's talk dogs, but I don't need just looking at pictures of my kids for no apparent reason. So, I appreciate you coming back on.